Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I want to lead you through my build of Tamiya's P-47D Thunderbolt Bubbletop, a kit which has been waiting its turn for far too long in my stash. I even already squeezed in this light Jeep side project first. The legendary Thunderbolt is finally ready to take its well-deserved place, so let's kick it off. As usual, the build starts with the cockpit. I'm using the 3D decals for the interior details, so first I remove the moldy details from the kit's plastic and make a few small modifications. Adding a couple of photo-etched parts. I'm using the set from Eduard. And drilling holes into the pedals. Then I paint all interior parts with iron as a base color. And over that goes Tamiya flat green. Now here's my go-to weathering trick for World War II builds. Because acrylics don't strongly adhere to this glossy metallic base, you can easily scratch the top coat to imitate realistic wear. Once the top coat is dry, I reactivate it slightly with water using a stiff brush or toothpick for control to create those fine, perfect scuff. Next, I paint the remaining details in black and silver using AK markers for mid-size elements. And a fine brush for small cables and instruments. Now it's time for the 3D decals. I'm using the Eduard set. They behave like a regular water slide decals, so they go down nicely on a glossy surface. Since my cockpit is painted flat, I added a drop of glue to help them stick. The seat belts come from Eduard's photo-etched set attached with the super glue. A touch of weathering next, some panel liner and dry brushing over the instrument panel to bring out the subtle metallic sheen. And now we can assemble everything together. And here's the finished cockpit. Let's move on to the main construction. First I'll take care of the wheelbase and other interior section of the main frame, improving the kit's detail with photo-etched parts. Then I repeat the same painting sequence, iron base and flat acrylics on top. And a gentle scratching for a worn look. Here are the main parts almost ready to assemble, but that would be too easy, right? As you can see, the kit surface is missing most of the rivet detail. I printed blueprint scale to the model size to show what the surface should really look like. Time to fix that. First I use blueprints to pencil in the rivet lines. Pre-marking is much safer when you have this many to add. It lets me check the layout before I commit the wheel. Then I grab a 0.7mm riveting wheel and start carefully from this point. I can work freehand with a little risk. I repeat this on both wings from both sides and the fuselage, and let me tell you that the curves on the fuselage are a little bit more challenging. This entire process took me about 6 separate evenings, not all in one go, of course. It's a bit exhausting, but absolutely worth the effort. Before closing the fuselage halves, I also added the photo-etched intercooler parts, although they won't be very visible at the end. Finally, we can start assembling. Last major section of the build is the tail, which needs to be glued separately. Some light sanding is required, but overall the fit is classic Tamiya. The fit is perfect. On this top tail section, 2 panel lines are missing, so I created them with a razor saw. And while I'm working on this part, maybe I can touch the name or nickname Bubbletop, because this is definitely related to this section. The early P-47D was nicknamed Razorback, had a high spine behind the cockpit which limited rear visibility, and it was a big issue in the dogfights. In late 1943, Republic introduced the bubble canopy inspired by the British Typhoon's design, which gave the pilot a nearly 360 degrees visibility. And the bubble top redesign required a new dorsal fin fillet to restore the stability that was lost when the spine was removed. Let me bring you some technical highlights about the Thunderbolt. The engine was Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, 18-cylinder radial, delivering up to 2,530 horsepower with water injection. The same powerhouse we used also in Hellcat and Corsair. Weight was nearly 8 tons loaded, marking that the P-47D was one of the heaviest single-engine fighters in the World War II. Maximum speed was up to 433 miles per hour, nearly 600 kilometers per hour at altitude, and it could outdive almost anything thanks to its strong airframe. The Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning machine guns, over 1 ton of bombs or 10 Hua rockets, making it as much a fight bomber as a pure interceptor. Thunderbolt's nickname was Jack, short for Juggernaut, or less formally Milk Jug. It was renowned for durability. Pilot said you could fly home with half the plane missing, and it played a crucial role in escort and ground attack missions in Europe from mid 1944 onwards. Bubbletops were among the first to operate from advanced landing grounds right after the D-Day, often with a colorful nose art and unique coal band markings, which is ideal inspiration for model display or weathering. At the end of major assembly, I fixed a few damaged panel lines around the engine cowling caused by sanding and gluing. Now this part will be fun. I usually build modern jets and spend a lot of time on exhaust nozzles, something which I obviously miss on World War II planes. So let's have a fun with the engine. Most of this won't be visible once installed, but that's fine. This hobby is about enjoying the process mainly. Just learn from my mistake and always take photos first. I have detailed interiors of few bombers that are now sealed away forever because I forgot to capture them. But I'm sure that you all have this experience. I'll use the photo-etched cable and hose set that attach to the cylinders. And for easier gluing, I drill small holes first. Now the engine is almost finished, so let's make it a little bit dirty. Next up, the propeller. I start with a silver base coat. Then I paint yellow tips and blades in the NATO black. After that I add scratches, especially along the edges. And once the paint is sealed with gloss varnish, I apply the stencil decals. Time for the main painting phase. I start with a black surfacer for my final inspection layer to check for any surface flaws. Then I hit the entire airframe with a gloss black coat, which is absolutely essential for a mirror-like metallic finish. For the main metallics, I turn to AK Extreme Metal Paints. We start with the polished aluminum, applied in several thin layers. The paint I buff out with a makeup swap, and yes, that's my secret test to see if my wife is watching. To add visual interest, I apply steel to panels like gun covers. And some other panels. And then white aluminum on the flaps and tail surface. This specific aircraft I'm modeling features a glossy blue nose and a tail stripe. I paint this on and then use a toothpick to create subtle chip and scratches within those colors. And now I install the engine and the cowling for the final paint of the olive drab anti-glare strip. Then immediately begin weathering it, lightly sanding and scratching the area to replicate fading and wear and let that shiny metallic base peek through. Now for the decals, which come after a layer of a gloss coat, I'm using the 8 nifties set from the Kids World combined with the original Tamiya decals, since the aftermarket set doesn't include the technical stencils. The Kids World decals are thin and subtle beautifully using microset and sol. Tamiya's decal, however, are thicker and tend to silver even after drying, so I applied Agama Hypersol, and after a day all the silvering vanished. While the decals are curing, let's tackle the landing gear. The sequence starts with the iron as the base, then interior green for the wheel bay covers, followed my scratching technique. And the stencils to the main legs. For the wheels, I'm swapping out the kids part for these beautiful Eduard 3D printed replacements. Now let's start the weathering process, beginning with the wheels. I used the rust pencils and the pen aligners before adding the hydraulic wire. And I'm adding more depth to the tires, starting with a darker black tone. Then panel liner for definition. Also a touch on the iron part. Followed with the chipping marker. And the rusty pencil. And slightly different rubber tone on the tires. And finally I apply the pigments to highlight the threads and the details nicely. Let's move on to the oils. Important is to seal the decals and the paint with the clear varnish. Gloss in this case, of course. Unless you are building a specific historical aircraft with the photo references and aiming for total accuracy, weathering is where your own interpretation and creativity come in. This is the real art of modeling. First, I use a diluted sepia oil paint to fill all the panel lines and rivets, bringing out the surface details. And once dried, I wipe away the excess with a paper towel, always moving in the direction of airflow. Next, I enhance selected panel lines around maintenance spots and engine cowling. Then I use odorless thinner to blend the excess paint out. I'm adding depth to the metallic areas using a highly diluted neutral gray. It's honestly more like a dirty water than a paint. Following that, I apply grime, focusing on the wings, walkways. and then oil streaks and hydraulic leakage on the fuselage and around the engine cowling. I'm using a watercolor pencil to enhance the olive drab anti-glare strip. And I will use these paints also for weathering of the bombs and the rocket launchers. The Thunderbolt's belly can be incredibly filthy, so I add heavy oil streaking right behind the engine cowling. And the final step is the airbrushing the exhaust stains using the mix of Tamiya black and red brown. And we are getting close to the finish line. First I paint the chrome silver lights using new AK chrome silver marker. It shines like a mirror. I can almost see my reflection in it. Then I paint the navigation lights on the wings clear red, green and orange. On the central line pylon I mount the fuel tank, adding a lead wire hose painted in rubber black. Then go the wheel bay covers and the gear legs, followed by the wheels. With careful checking of alignment. Next are the rocket launchers and the bombs. The P-47 was often used as an interceptor, but I like to see it fully loaded. Who wants to display a plane with only fuel tanks, right? Then the cannons. The gun sight in the cockpit, even with this tiny photo-etched part. The antenna. And finally, I can unmask the canopy. We've hit the finish line. Thank you so much for following this Thunderbolt build. If you enjoyed watching this process, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss my next project. And here it is, the finished Tamiya P-47D Thunderbolt Bubbletop.